Here's the Okay, I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and I just uploaded it. For those who want to take it, I just put the PDF of this document of the sources that we're going to look at. Hi, Felice. Um, so, as I mentioned a little bit just before, the question of key cards is going to be, in a certain sense, a stand-in for the more broad question of electricity on Shabbat. Um, and as our homes and as electricity becomes more and more ubiquitous, all these questions become extremely complicated. That includes things like hearing aids, microphones, elevators, um, sensor lights, key cards in hotels, obviously, which is what we're going to talk about in a very specific way in just a moment. Um, and what I'm going to say about electricity for right now is just that most contemporary poskim think about the nature of the prohibition of electricity as some kind of unclarified or unspecified rabbinic prohibition. That is to say, it is not connected, at least contemporarily, to the prohibition of fire. It's not a malacha midoraita. It's not a Torah prohibition.
Hmm.
It's some kind of either a minhag, a strong minhag, or an isur d'Rabbanan. And where we're going to land eventually in 2 weeks' time, because I'm going to teach this week, then Rabbi Katz is next week, and I'm going to come back in 2 weeks because I have a conference I have to be at next week. Where we're going to land in 2 weeks' time is that that sort of unclarified or unspecified prohibition is, in a certain sense, a kind of result of the intuition of the rabbis of the prior generation. Hey, Moshe, good to see you.
Oh,
Uh,
welcome. It's so good to see, to not see you, but it's, to have you participate. We miss.
I hope the Berkshires is doing well. Say hello to Seth and Adam for me. Um, So there is a kind of intuition that rabbis had 150 years ago as electricity was kind of first coming on the scene, that in fact electricity was really prohibited. Some people said maybe in fact a prohibition on the level of a Torah prohibition. That intuition, though I think technically incorrect, where how to sort of calibrate the actual prohibition, is spiritually correct. And the reason we all know that is that the reality of our professional lives, of our general lives, is that our most productive tool in the 21st century is an electronic device. That's not the way the Torah lists the 39 prohibited categories. The 39 prohibited categories of labor have to do with agriculture or weaving or all those kind of things. And we all know experientially and intuitively that when our phones are in our pockets or on the table or at a computer, that allows us to be productive professionally and removes us from being in the moment. And the experience of sitting at a Shabbos meal without our phones is very different than sitting at a meal on Monday night dinner when our phones are in our pockets or our phones on the table. So there's a certain genius to that intuition that I want to celebrate because I think it's correct and it's real, and it's important to sort of note that that's a really good idea. And at the same time, there's another reality, which is that electricity is becoming more and more and more ubiquitous in a way that it makes it very difficult to go through a normal day without interacting with electricity, and not email or text messages or phone, but just walking in your home. So, and that could be things like flushing the toilet or turning on the water or walking into your home and there's a thermostat that senses your presence and you have a Nest thermostat, right? Electricity is becoming just everywhere. So, the short answer to all of these questions, and then we're going to spend the next for an hour or a bit, is that we have to find a way to prohibit our smartphones and permit our smart homes. The question is, how do you do that? How do you actually make the difference or distinction between your phone and your fridge, or your phone and your toilet? Um, I just noticed I was reading about where was it? I think it was Detroit, some big city. They're making it, and New York City is supposed to be going in that direction. They're making it so that every new installation of a toilet is going to require a sensor so that it only uses exactly the right amount of water to sort of flush the waste that was present. And it's an environmental law. So every new toilet at some point is going to require a sensor. Now, that may take a while for every toilet in America to get there, but that'll be like in our lifetime where you can't flush a toilet on Shabbos, which is not a reasonable option. So the question is, what do we do? How do we live in a world in which we're going to have to interact with electricity in a way that's different than we currently do? What is that going to mean for Shabbos? Okay, so now let me share my screen. What we're actually going to do is spend today dealing almost not at all with the question of formally the question of electricity, much more with the question of intention and kavanah. So you see here these three bricks, one on top of the other.
Yes.
Hmm.
See that
Yes.
picture? So the bottom brick here says Eino mitkavein. This is a very important concept in the history of Hilchot Shabbat. If you do a permitted action that might have an unintended and forbidden consequence. So I do A, and A has an outcome B that may or may not happen, and B is prohibited. That's called Eino mitkavein. Built on top of Eino mitkavein is called psik reisha. Psik reisha, well, I'll explain the term in a few minutes, means doing a permitted action that definitely has an unintended and forbidden consequence. I do A, and it will definitely lead to B. A is permitted, B is prohibited. A is permitted, B is prohibited. I don't intend B, but every time I do A, it leads to B. What's a good example of that? What's the most common version of A always leading to B that we're all used to every day in our homes?
Perhaps opening up a refrigerator
The
and
refrigerator.
causing the compressor to go on because you introduced
Okay,
warm
so
air into the refrigerator.
I would say not the compressor and the thermostat. I would say just the light.
The light.
Because and it's important to make the distinction. The difference between the thermostat slash compressor is that there's a time lag. When I open the fridge, there's going to be seconds, minutes, depending on what's going on, and how high my air conditioning is, how cold it is outside. When I open the fridge, the light, assuming the light's working, the light will always go on, and it goes on instantaneously. Right? There's no time lag by design, at least. Right? Okay, that's very important to distinguish. The thermostat has a time delay. The light does not have a time delay. I'll also just note here as a little bit of an aside, there's an important distinction to be made between an incandescent bulb and an LED bulb. So in the old school fridges, and you could still find them around, you'll have an LED bulb, a small little like 20-watt bulb that you could unscrew. Most fridges these days have LED lights that are actually difficult to turn off sometimes. Sometimes they have Shabbat settings and the like. It's a very important halachic difference to be made between an incandescent bulb and an LED bulb. Incandescent bulb has a burning filament. Igniting a burning filament is a Torah prohibition. An LED light is just, so to speak, electricity. It's some unclarified rabbinic prohibition. LED is fundamentally different than incandescent. And by the way, sometimes halogen bulbs, which are sometimes like outdoor security lights, are also often, they have a hot burning filament, which is why incandescent bulbs and halogens go out faster than LEDs, because there's actually a burning piece of metal in there. So igniting a burning piece of metal is a Torah prohibition. Turning on an LED light, or by the way, this light on your phone is just, so to speak, electricity. It's prohibited rabbinically, but it's not a Torah prohibition.
What does this do with fluorescent bulbs?
Fluorescents are also only rabbinic. Okay, so that's very important because many of the responsa that were written about refrigerators were written in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, and they still had incandescent bulbs. And so when you're reading those Shelot and Shuvot from Moshe Feinstein and the like, they're dealing with a totally different halachic reality. They're dealing with the question of opening the fridge and violating a potential Torah prohibition, as opposed to us, if you have a fridge that's 20 years or less, 20 years young or less, it's very likely has LED bulbs. Although sometimes you'll come across an incandescent bulb these days still. Okay, so that's doing a permitted action that will definitely have an unintended slash forbidden consequence. And then, so that's layer number 2 of this little brick structure that I have built here. Layer number 3, it's called in Hebrew or Aramaic lo nichale, doing a permitted action that definitely has an unintended and forbidden consequence in which I am not interested. So I'm doing A, that leads to B automatically, but I don't really care if B happens. A good example of that is, imagine for a moment in your kitchen, you have a floodlight pointing directly at your fridge. So I don't really care if the light goes on. Meaning if the kitchen is dark, it's late Friday night and there's no light in your kitchen, it's actually a lot easier to find the milk when you open the door. But if you have a huge floodlight pointing right at your fridge door, when you open the fridge, you are doing A, opening the door, which is permitted, which causes B, the light turns on, which is prohibited, but I don't really care because there's enough light for me to see because I have a floodlight pointing right at the fridge. Okay, so what I want to try to unpack is these 3 layers and how that might talk to the question of our key card. See the picture of the key card here?
Yes.
Yes.
Part of the key of this key card is, if you notice, there are different types of key cards. This key card, at least as it shows in this picture, is not actually touching the door. There's actually some space. So most hotel key cards are designed to work from inside your wallet. So for example, I have a little card in here that unlocks the HIR door. It sits in my phone carrying case. So I can just sort of swipe it by the door. The key card is not touching the magnetic device.
Mm-hmm.
There's an inch or a centimeter, whatever, between the key and the electromagnetic device, and it unlocks the door. Okay, it's important to note that there is a little bit of space between the card and the door. That's actually how they design them. Most of the time when you go up to a hotel, you'll actually tap it, like when you do tap to pay. Usually you actually tap it because that's what we do intuitively or instinctively. You don't actually have to in most hotels. Okay, file that away. The fact that you don't have to actually touch the electromagnetic or the electric device will be very important. You can also see, you can't really see it here, but there's usually also an LED light that goes. It goes from red to green or just shows up as green. We'll have to figure out what's the status of that LED light. Okay? So now, with all that in mind, we're going to put all of our modern technology away and go back to the world of the Mishnah and the Gemara and try to understand what's the status of Eino Mitkavein. I do A, and it has an unintended and possible but not necessary outcome. That's brick layer number 1. And there's brick layer number 2. What happens if I do A and it definitely needs to B? That's brick layer number 2. Brick layer number 3 is what happens if I do A. It definitely leads to B, but I don't really care about C. I don't really care about the fact that B has now happened. Okay, everybody see the layers there? Because it's important to keep them clear. Because then, what will happen, you'll be able to then talk about what's happening when, for example, you're walking on the street and you're turning a light on, or you're doing something like the key card, which we'll get to. Okay. So let me just scroll down a little bit. Is the text big enough, or should I make it bigger?
Fine.
Good.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions before we actually go into these texts? Does it make sense? Everybody clear? We got the 3 levels.
Yes.
I
We're
have
gonna
a
go-
comment. I have
Yeah.
a comment.
Go ahead.
What difference does it make? I mean, really, if I'm walking on the street and I don't know something is causing a light to go on, Hashem is going to punish me? I mean, what is that?
Well, so no, if you don't know, it's not a problem. But let's say you do know. Let's say you're walking there
Oh.
because you want to get the light to turn. You're turning the light on by walking there.
Okay, so you're talking about if there's no
Yeah, you know what's going on. Yeah, or let's say your stairwell has emergency lights built in. So when you walk through the stairwell, lights go on. You know, it happens every time. Right? You know, that's the way most of our buildings are. In fact,
No, you're not worried about that. You don't have control over that.
Well, but so maybe you have to walk down another stairwell, or maybe you can't live in that apartment building. I don't know. There's any number of possible answers to the question. I just want to know I have to at least clarify the question. It could be the answer is, but I'm just trying to ask the question. Now, by the way, whenever I teach Hilchot Shabbat in yeshiva, we spend about a year or so. At some point, a student will say something like, which you sort of already hinted at, does God really care if I rip the toilet paper?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll tell you, I believe deeply that God cares if you rip the toilet paper, but I'm not going to answer the toilet paper question at this moment. That's my own spiritual mishigas, which isn't necessarily the purpose of this class. You could bring me back another time to talk about how God is involved in the details of halakha, but that's the way my brain works. I love these details. Hopefully we can have the details have meaning. Sometimes they have meaning. Sometimes it's just paying attention to details as inherently building a meaningful life. Okay? Well, let's take a look now. The Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah and Masechet Beitza at the end of the second chapter. Most of Masechet Beitza, the first two chapters for sure, deal with the laws of Yom Tov. And then it switches at the very end of the second chapter to deal with the laws of Shabbat in an unusual manner. So, by the way, I just have a screen over here, so I may be tipping my head. I'm not looking away. I have a screen with a text to my right. So the Mishnah says, Agala shel katan, a child's wagon, which is either a stroller or a walker of some sort. That's actually debate. What is the word agala? So the Mishnah gives us three kind of qualities of a child's wagon, so here, the translation here is taken from Sefaria. This is the Steinsaltz translation. He says, which he plays and upon which he also sits. So he's thinking it's a kind of a walker, basically, that a kid goes into. So it has a couple of rules. Number one is Tme'a Midras. So the rules of Tum'a v'Ta'ara, of purity and impurity, which always feel very foreign to us, were very much alive in the world of the rabbis. And for them, the definition of a functional utensil was that a utensil can become impure. If it's not a utensil, it can't become impure. So when they say Tme'a Midras, it can become ritual. It is susceptible to ritual impurity by treading. Treading means sitting on it. That's just a way of the rabbi saying that this wagon of the child is in fact a normative halachic utensil. Number one. Number two, nitelet b'Shabbat. It can be moved on Shabbat or handled on Shabbat. That's another way of saying it's not muktzah. It's a movable item. Number three, the last line of this Mishnah is Eina nigreret ella al gabe kelim. So translated, and it may be dragged on the ground on Shabbat only upon cloth. So if you wanted to move this wagon, if you were to picture a stroller or a walker over dirt, there has to be cloth on top of it. It may be dragged on the ground on Shabbat upon cloth. A stone pavement or the like is otherwise, as otherwise it would create a furrow when dragged, and one would be liable to the prohibition of plowing. So if you're pushing a stroller on very loose dirt, that stroller, the assumption here is, let's assume it's heavy enough, will create a furrow in the ground. And the first position of the Mishnah seems to say that that's a problem. Says Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol hakelim ein nigrarim. No vessels can be dragged on the ground except for the wagon, chutz min ha'agala, because children's wagons, in his mind, at least or in his experience, are very light. Because what does a child's wagon or a stroller do? It doesn't actually dig a ditch. It doesn't dig a furrow. It just presses down the earth. And since the earth isn't moved, it's not considered digging or plowing. So Rabbi Yehuda says, even though the child's wagon doesn't in fact make a furrow, anything that if you were to drag it over dirt, it were to make a furrow, cannot be dragged, even if your intention is not to make the furrow. Rabbi
Question.
Yehuda. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, Judy.
When one walks on ground, it's, it's not an agala or any kind of an object, but still you could be making a furrow, like which could be used
Yes.
to flower and so that raises that
There's a
question.
difference between wearing heels or cleats as opposed to wearing flats or shoes or sneakers.
Uh-huh.
So in fact, if we are walking on earth on regular ground and you're gonna for sure your shoe is such that it will for sure make a hole, a ditch, because you're wearing very tall heels or you're wearing cleats like you're gonna run and play sports, that's actually a problem on Shabbat.
What about snow?
Snow is the same thing. We'll have to see. Snow would be
And
so.
that you can't avoid.
Okay, but so here, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you couldn't walk on snow because Rabbi Yehuda holds Eino mitkavein, even though I'm not intending to smush it down or to make the furrow, it's still prohibited.
Right, because that's the way it works.
Okay, now that's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Take a look. This is from the Mishnah in Masechet Beitza. The Mishnah has the position of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tosefta, which is sort of a parallel text from the same time period, gives us the position of Rabbi Shimon. Says Rabbi Shimon, he's going to be our hero. Rabbi Shimon Omer, he says as follows: Gorer Adam mita kisei v'safsal v'katedra. A person is in fact allowed to drag a bed, a chair, or a bench and a katedra. A katedra is a fancy chair, like the one that a kala would sit in her wedding. To you on Shabbat. I don't have to tell you that it's permissible on Yom Tov. So here we have a debate. Rabbi Yehuda thinks you can't drag anything over dirt, and Rabbi Shimon thinks you could pretty much drag anything. A bench, a bed, or a chair is permitted to be dragged. Now notice the Mishnah and the Tosefta are not the same text. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon are actually not talking to each other. Rabbi Yehuda says his rule, don't drag stuff. Rabbi Shimon says his rule, you can drag stuff. Now jumps the Gemara, source number 3.
They live at the same time?
They lived at the same time. They knew each other. They were
Okay.
buddies. But these two texts are not, in these two texts, they're not talking to each other. It takes until the Talmud Bavli comments on the Braita, puts the Braita in conversation with the Mishnah, but now we get what ultimately is a very foundational machloket throughout all of Hilchot Shabbat. So the Mishnah had taught al gabi kelim, you were permitted to drag the bench or the wagon over cloth on dirt. That's permissible, but not on earth, not on dirt. Al karka lo. Why? So I'll just read in the English. The Gemara infers. This is from here. Upon cloth, yes, it is permitted. You can but directly on the ground, no, it is not permitted. What is the reason? It is because he creates a furrow in the ground when he drags the wagon across it, which we just said. The Gemara asks, according with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is in accordance with the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says an unintentional act, i.e., a permitted action from which an unintended prohibited labor ensues on Shabbat, is prohibited, even though the person performing it did not have the prohibited labor in mind. Rabbi Yehuda is machmir. Because if it were in accordance with the position of Rabbi Shimon, didn't he say an unintentional act is permitted? Because Rabbi Shimon holds, as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda, unintentional acts, eino mitkavein, mutar, is permitted. Since there was no intention to perform the prohibited act, as we learned explicitly in a Mishnah, it's not really a Mishnah, it's a Braita, that Rabbi Shimon says a person may drag a bed, a chair, or a bench on the ground, provided that he does not intend to make a furrow. Note, by the way, if you look back at Rabbi Shimon, he says you can drag the bench, you can drag the bed, chair, and bench. He just says the rule. The Talmud Bavli did something sneaky. The Bavli, when it was quoting the Tosefta, added in, provided that he does not intend to make a furrow. That text, that line, provided that he does not intend to make a furrow, does not appear in the original Tanaitic material. The Bavli inserts it. What the Bavli does is it gives a svara, it gives a reason for the position of Rabbi Shimon. By doing that, it allows us to see Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon is not just debating this technical question of dragging wagons on earth, but having a huge debate. Right? One could have said maybe this debate was just about dirt or something. It could have been a very, very local question going on. But the Bavli explodes this debate and turns it into a fundamental debate that flows throughout all of Shas. Rabbi Yehuda holds davar she'eino mitkavein is asur, even if I don't intend. If there is a possible unintended outcome, it's prohibited. And Rabbi Shimon holds davar she'eino mitkavein mutar, as long as I don't intend, and that unintended outcome is possible but not necessary, permissible. Okay, one of the more fascinating aspects here is that the Gemara never looks for a source for Rabbi Shimon, and halachically we paskin like Rabbi Shimon. Everybody agrees that we paskin like Rabbi Shimon. Davar she'eino mitkaven, which is that first layer of the bricks, an unintended action, an action that leads to an unintended consequence that may or may not happen, permissible. That's the halacha. Rabbi Shimon wins against Rabbi Yehuda. Everybody agrees to that part. However, that's only level one. That's only when the unintended and prohibited outcome might or might not happen. What happens when the unintended but prohibited outcome will definitely happen? Okay, skipping a little bit here. So now on page number 4, the Gemara has a case of a candle or a lamp that's behind a door, and it's very windy outside. So the case is ner she'achorei hadelet. A candle, really, when they use the word ner, what they mean is a lamp. So picture like the genie in the lamp. It's a big lamp, and there's a candle's fire sticking up out of it with a wick. So the Braita says, or the Gemara says, Poteach v'noel kedarko. There's a lamp behind the door with a burning fire. You can open and close the door. V'im kavta kavta. And if it goes out, it goes out. Not my problem because you're not intending. Rav, the Amora Rav, is very upset. Layit ala Rav. Rav cursed somebody who did this. Not so nice to do, but Rav was very upset with whatever rabbi permitted doing such a crazy thing. Amalei Ravina Ravacha Berei de Rava. So Ravina says, some people say the Ravashi. Well, why did Rav get so upset? My time layit ala Rav. Why, Rav, are you so upset that they're permitting people to open and close the door when there's a burning lamp behind the door? Perhaps mishum desavar la Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe you, Rav, hold like Rabbi Yehuda that unintended consequences are always prohibited. But we know that's not true. You, Rav, taught us. Vatana katani like Rabbi Shimon. You hold like Rabbi Shimon. We all hold like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda lost this debate. So what are you getting so upset, Rav, about the burning lamp behind the door? That should only be a problem for Rabbi Yehuda, because you open the door, maybe it'll go out, maybe it won't go out. You're misunderstanding. Down to here. Amar le baha afilu Rabbi Shimon modeh. This case, when you have a lamp behind a door and you open the door and a whoosh of air comes in, you misunderstood. You thought it might or it might not go out. The case is it's really windy outside. And if you open the door, it's definitely going to put the candle out. So baha afilu Rabbi Shimon modeh. Even Rabbi Shimon, who holds that unintended consequences are permissible, here he would prohibit. Why? Daha Abaye v'Rava da Amrei Tarbayu. 2 rabbis both agree. Moda Rabbi Shimon v'Psik Reisha v'lo Yamut. So literally cut off its head, and will it not die? So this is a very unusual case, let's say. The Rambam explains this case as follows. The case of Psik Reisha. Psik Reisha literally means cut off its head. So who's cutting off whose head? So the Rambam understands as follows. I happen to be the father of 4 boys who like to play with balls. But let's say I lived in the ancient world and I didn't have any balls in my home for my children to throw at each other. And I happen to have a chicken running around my home. And instead of giving them a ball, I'm going to cut off the chicken's head and let them play with the head as a ball. They're going to play soccer with the ball. They're going to go to FIFA with their chicken head ball. I don't want to kill the chicken. I just want to give my kids a ball to play with. So the Gemara says, Psik Reisha v'lo yamut. You're going to cut off the chicken's head and the chicken won't die? Obviously, every time you cut off a chicken's head, it dies. So you can't bother me with Rabbi Shimon and say, I didn't intend to kill the chicken, because every time I do X, Y always happens. Every time you cut off the head of a chicken, even if I don't want to kill it, that's just the way it works. Every time I open the fridge, the light goes on. Note, by the way, every time means really every time. There's kind of no exceptions to this head of a chicken rule. So psik reisha means 100% or as close as we can be to 100%. It's always possible that the light in the fridge went out. But if you assume that your fridge is working and it's in normal order, and you open the fridge, light always goes on, that's psik reisha. So 99.9% of the time means that A definitely leads to B. You can't fall back on Rabbi Shimon on his permissible stance if the outcome is necessary. So, for example, if I take my key card and swipe it by the door, it should open pretty much every time. That's the way the key card is designed to work. When I walk in the emergency hallway, I walk in the stairwell, and the emergency lights go on. It's designed so that every time you walk that way, the lights go on. So, psik reisha, this concept of unintended consequences that are necessary, is a kind of a limitation on unintentional outcomes. Level 1, bricklayer level 1 was unintended and therefore permissible. Bricklayer level number 2, unintended but necessary, now prohibited. Okay? It's important to sort of, before we go to the next level, understand why that should be the case. So let me put it to you before we look at this text. Why do you think that if A necessarily leads to B, that you can't fall back to Rabbi Shimon? Why might Rabbi Shimon say, even Rabbi Shimon say, that if every time I do A, it leads to B, it's not permissible to do A? How does the necessary outcome change the sort of conceptual framework here?
It's almost as though you were doing it, with intention. If you already know, you can't say, I didn't know. But since you know that such and such is going to happen, it's almost as though you did it intentionally.
Okay, so you could argue, which is a good argument to say, that if I do A and it necessarily leads to B, I can no longer make the argument that I don't have intention. It's as though I intended. Very reasonable.
It has to do with predictability. You know that it's significantly reliable that it will happen. I have Shabbos candles near my window, and there's an air conditioner, a vent coming up. And when it got hot, I put on the air conditioner and it blew out the candles once. So now I know what's going to happen. I know that it's when the air blows on the candles, they
Yeah.
blow out. So I have to move where my candles are now.
Okay, good. You learn from experience. So that's I think the standard way to think about it. Let's look at a text from the 1800s. Rabbi Shimon Shkop wrote a very fascinating commentary on Masechet Ketubot. It's a very important kind of conceptual model for how this all works. He says as follows. I'm just going to read this in the English. And it appears from this that the reasoning according to Rabbi Shimon that psik reisha is forbidden. Psik reisha here it'll always happen, even when does not intend the consequence, is not because, since he knows with certainty that it will inevitably occur, we therefore consider him as if he intended that forbidden act as well. It's not what Judy said, but he said that's like one way of thinking about it. Don't think that we're going to sort of apply intention. Rather, in a case of psik reisha, one does not need to intend the forbidden act itself. And the fact that he intends the psikresha of a living creature suffices. You're going to cut off the head of the animal. For since the life force of a living creature is one thing with the severing of its head, we consider the severing of the head together with the taking of the soul as a single act that cannot be separated from one another. And one who intends the severing of the head is considered as if he intended the taking of the soul, to kill the animal. So what he's saying here, it's a subtle difference, but it's important, and we'll see why it's important in just a moment. One way to think about the stringency of psikresha, the stringency of necessary outcomes, is, as Judy said, that it's as though you intend. Another way to think about it is that when I open the door of the fridge, it's not as though there are two separate things happening. I'm opening the door and turning on the light at the same time. It's not A leading to B. It's A and B are squished together. If the outcome B is always going to happen on every instance, so it's not like a Rube Goldberg machine where I put a marble here on the top and then it goes through all these things and all of a sudden I fry an egg in a pan someplace down the line. It's that the two things that I'm talking about, opening the door of the fridge and the light going on, are in fact happening at the same time. The fridge door is a good example because imagine for a moment it was dark in your kitchen, not on Shabbos, and you needed some light for a reason. We don't want to turn on the lights above the head because there was somebody sleeping nearby. You might imagine a case in which you wanted to turn the light on in the fridge to get some light in your kitchen. How do you turn the light on in your fridge? What do?
Open the door.
You open the door, right? Opening the door, we could imagine conceptually, I'm opening the door to get the milk. But opening the door is just another way of saying turning on the light. When I'm opening a door to a fridge, it's not that A is leading to B. A and B are the same thing because they happen every time. And the fridge door is a good example of that because you could imagine a circumstance you wanted to read and you could open the fridge light and open the fridge door to turn on the light because it's the same, in fact, physical behavior. So the way this is spoken about, kind of, if you put it in sort of a little bit more abstract legal frame, one is imputing intent retroactively, which is what Judy said. The other way of talking about this is single act indivisibility. These are like legal terms. So what Rav Shimon Shkop did is he developed a very tight analytic set of language. It's all in Hebrew and sometimes slippery. And there's a real power to taking particularly him and turning it into contemporary legal language. So I could impute intent retroactively. That's one way to think about the stringency of psikresha, or talk about single act indivisibility. The fridge and the light, opening the door and light, are really one physical activity. It's not that A is leading to B, A and B are the same. The reason why all that is important is what happens when I don't really care if the light goes on. When I have a floodlight in the fridge, in the kitchen, and I could see the milk totally fine, even if the light doesn't go on. Because then there's a difference between thinking about single act indivisibility and imputing intent retroactively. By the way, Bert, are we supposed to end at 12? Or what's the official end time? I forgot to ask you. 12, okay. So let's look at two examples where the outcome of an unintended but necessary consequence appears to be irrelevant. We're going to look at two and try to make sense out of what those two can teach us. So let's say you had a palm frond that you're going to use for your lulav, but you actually had berries on it or dates on it. If you actually had the tree, you could imagine such a thing. These days, when you buy our lulavs, there's nothing on them. But in the olden days, you go out and pull a palm frond off the tree. There could have been dates or berries on the palm frond. And the lulav is not kosher if it has berries on it. So let's say it's Yom Tov morning. You want to shake your lulav, and you realize, oh goodness, there's still a bunch of berries on my lulav. You actually can't take the berries off because that's a type of fixing. It's called tikkun of your lulav, of your palm frond, turning it from a non-kosher lulav into a kosher lulav. So the Gemara says, "Ein mima'atim b'yom tov." You can't diminish the number of berries on the festival to render. Oh, sorry, we're not talking about the lulav. We're talking about the hadas. It's not the lulav. It would, I guess, the same would apply to a lulav to render the myrtle branch fit. In the name of Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, they said one may diminish the number. So says Rabbi Eliezer, you can. The Gemara asks, but isn't preparing a vessel on festival, isn't it asur? Because you're fixing it, you're making it a kosher hadas, a kosher myrtle, as he renders an unfit myrtle branch fit for you for filling in the mitzvah. So how can you remove them? So what's going on? You had your myrtle branch with berries, you took off the berries, and now poof, you have a kosher hadas. So Amar Rav Ashi, what's the case? Kagon sheliktan la'achila. You didn't remove them for the purposes of now having a kosher hadas. You remove them because you wanted to eat a berry. What your intention was not to make a kosher hadas. Your intention was to have a snack. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, Savar Lakavu, and Rabbi Eliezer holds like his father, Rabbi Shimon, who holds davar she'eino mitkaven mutar. So since your intention is not to make your hadas, your myrtle kosher, it should be permissible. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Vaha Abaye v'Rabba da Amrei Tarvayu Moda Rabbi Shimon b'psik reisha v'lo yamut. What are you talking about? Everybody, even Rabbi Shimon, concedes that in the case of cutting off its head, it's a problem. Even Rabbi Shimon, who says, let's just read the English here to sort of flesh it all the way out, who says that an unintentional act is permitted, said so only in cases where the permitted result is possible, but not guaranteed. However, when the prohibited result is inevitable, just as death inevitably ensues from decapitation when you cut off the head of the chicken, the act is prohibited. The case of picking berries off a myrtle branch for food, one cannot claim that he did not intend for the prohibited result of preparing the myrtle branch for use to ensue. In this case, the myrtle branch will inevitably be rendered permitted. How is this permitted? Okay, so I don't understand. How could you, even if your intention is just to eat the berries, you are always going to, by virtue of removing the berries, have now a kosher hadas. So what's the case? Hachabamayaskinan, the itle hoshana acharite. I have a whole bunch of other ones. I have a bunch of other myrtle branches. So I have 10 myrtle branches in front of me. One of them has a bunch of berries on it. And I can use the other ones for my lulav and etrog, for my daled minim. But one of them has a bunch of berries, and I'm hungry. I want a snack. So even though my unintended but necessarily prohibited outcome will occur, since for me it's kind of irrelevant because I have kosher myrtles hanging out, it's permissible. So how does that map onto our case? If my floodlight is on in the kitchen, when I open the door, thereby turning on the light, it doesn't matter to me because I could see into the fridge without the light from inside the fridge. I have my floodlight in my kitchen. The floodlight in the kitchen is like your myrtle branch with berries when I have a whole bunch of others.
Would you be allowed to purposely install a floodlight to create this situation, or that would be asur?
You'd probably be okay. But it doesn't have to be a floodlight, by the way. It could just be the lights are on in your kitchen.
Right.
I think my sense is that in most people's kitchens, when the lights are on, the light inside the fridge is kind of irrelevant.
Right.
In most cases, I could construct the case where your lights were kind of weird. My working assumption is that in most kitchens, when the lights are on, the fridge light is not really providing so much light.
Mm-hmm.
Tova, you're muted. Tova, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
Are you saying that if you have a floodlight and you open but the light is off in the refrigerator? Are you saying if the light is on in the refrigerator, if the light turns on in the refrigerator and there's a floodlight?
Right, that's exactly the case that I'm describing. And by the way, I'm not yet paskening halacha l'maaseh. I'm just giving you an
No,
analogy from this case. The case
because
is I'm taking the
uh-huh.
berries off of the branch. I'm making
Yes,
myself a kosher myrtle.
yes.
But since I have other kosher myrtles, it's okay. So it's a case of unintended necessary outcome, prohibited outcome, or I don't really care about the outcome. That is the floodlight in the kitchen. Because when I open the door to the fridge and I turn the light on inside the fridge, I don't care because I could see without the lights inside the fridge.
Oh, so the light in the floodlight is causing the light, not the light in the refrigerator
I'm
or
not
contributing.
the light in the refrigerator is still turning on. It's just that
Yes,
it doesn't help me
I understand. I
because I could see
understand.
already.
Yes.
I would distinguish here again also imagine there are two different types of security lights that people have in their hallways. Some of them turn all the way off and turn all the way on. Some of them go dim and then get brighter. Light that go all the way off. So if you're walking through the hallway and the light stayed off, it would be dark. It actually might be dangerous to walk down steps if it's really dark. That would be a case where I need the light to go on. But if it dims and then it gets brighter, that's a case where I don't really benefit from the light. I could walk down with the lights that are kind of dim, but it's a little bit easier, but I don't really get the same benefit. So dimming lights in a hallway are kind of like the berry. Let me give you another version of this case because it's slippery and it's an important concept. There's another version of this story from the Gemara. So this was from the Gemara in Sukkah 33. Now we're in Shabbos 103. You're not allowed to weed or remove branches or prunes. That's violating the malacha of zoreya, of planting. You're basically fixing your gardening fundamentally. So pruning a tree, even though you're not putting something in the ground, if you're pruning a tree, you're causing a tree to grow better. That's a kind of zoreya, planting, which is prohibited on Shabbat. The sages taught with regard to one who severs endives. They talk a lot about endives. I don't know why they had a lot of opinions about endives. It must have been they had endives growing wild because they treat endives the way we treat dandelions. They're like a weed that they want to get rid of. But endives today are like a yummy part of salad. So I don't know what's salad, what's a weed. Hard to know. Everybody has a different version of that. But the case is you picked a bunch of endives that are growing like weeds in their yard, in their garden, or you pruned reeds. If you did so for human consumption, so I'm picking the endive to put it into salad, then it's a problem. You're only liable if you did a certain minimum amount. Most milachot on Shabbat have a minimum amount in order to violate. If you did so and the minimum amount for endives is a fig's bulk. If you did it for an animal consumption, then it's the amount that a goat would eat. If you did so for fuel, like you're going to burn it, so that you're liable for severing an equivalent to that which could be used to cook an egg, and that's the amount of fuel. If you did so to enhance the land, if you're picking the endives, think of dandelions as weeds, so then there's no minimum amount because every time you remove a weed, it makes the stuff prettier or nicer or grow better. The Gemara says, wait a second. If every time you pick an endive, it makes your garden better, what do you hakami chinik about feeding your animals or eating them or burning them? Every time you pick the endive, every time you remove the dandelion, it beautifies your garden. It's weeding. Wait a minute, says the Gemara. Aren't all these done to enhance the land? Each stalk that a person uproots, and every time you remove a weed, it makes your garden better. So what was the case? Let me give you a case in which maybe removing the endives wouldn't be an issue, removing the weeds. It was Rabbi Bar Rav Yosef, who both said they taught this brighter with regard to swampland. We weren't talking about a normal garden. We're talking about a swamp. I mentioned to Bart, I just dropped off my son at Newark Airport. He's on his way to Machach. We drove by the swamplands of New Jersey. So you, with regard to swampland where grass is not uprooted, that we're removing the endives doesn't help. And Abaye said, you know what? Even if you're talking about a field, let's say Abaye says, in fact, you have endives growing wild. There are these wild growing weeds in your garden.
Free from cell.
It's wild growing weeds in your garden. And in fact, you want to remove these endives. But the case is, you just don't intend to enhance your land. It's a no mit kavein.
Hi.
Rabbi Shimon. Moshe, is that you? Okay, the Gemara asks, well, what are you talking about?
You're not on mute, so thank you.
Says the Gemara, however, is it not Abaye and Rabba who both say that Rabbi Shimon, who holds that one is liable for performing the unintentional action, concedes?
Okay,
if you cut off its head, you'll die. So what are you telling me about? You can't say every time you pick the endive, you're weeding your garden. It should be usher. In any case where the outcome is inevitable, as in this case where the land will be enhanced, one's lack of intention does not exempt him.
Wait a second. Everybody should mute their phone, their computer, so we can hear the rabbi.
I got it. I muted him. I'm the host, so I could mute. Moshe, did you want to share something, Moshe?
No, thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to mute you so that you don't get background noise. The Gemara answers, Abaye's statement is only necessary in a case where you did so in another's land. So I wasn't in my backyard. I was in David's backyard. And I don't care about David's garden. If you had a garden gate, I would really care about your garden. But in this case, the guy says, I'm not interested in David's garden getting more beautiful. I just want to take a bite of the endives. So again, in both of these instances, the berries from the myrtle when I have a bunch of extras, or the endives from the ground where it's not my land, so I'm not invested in the weeding of the ground, they're both unintended, necessary outcomes where I don't care about the outcome, either because I have more myrtles or because it's not my backyard.
What about Kol Yisrael Arevim Mizela Zeh?
Okay, so let's say it's a public garden.
Okay.
You just have to accept the parameters here. We're trying to create a conceptual case here, a conceptual model, which is Eino mitkavein b'psik reisha delo nichale. That's a lot of words. Eino mitkavein, not intended. B'psik reisha, but definite outcome. Lo nichale, but I don't really care. These two Gemarot are used by a position of the Rishonim to say that it's permissible. That is a minority position. The majority position does not decide that way. The minority position is associated particularly with a book called the Aruch. The Aruch is, interestingly, a dictionary. And so what we have here is Eino mitkavein b'psik reisha delo nichale. Unintended, necessary outcomes where I'm not particularly invested in the outcome can be permissible. Here it's happening on a Torah level because of picking endives or picking berries are all potentially isurei deoraita. We're not talking about rabbinic violations. So now the question becomes, you have eino mitkavein b'psik reisha delo nichale, unintended, definite, but uninterested. That's opening the fridge when the lights are on in your kitchen. It's unintended, necessary outcome where I don't really need the lights on inside my fridge because I have my floodlight or because I have my kitchen lights on. Additionally, what makes it more permissible in the fridge, in a modern fridge, is that you have an LED bulb and not an incandescent bulb. So the outcome is only ever rabbinic. Even if you were to turn on the light yourself actively, it's only a rabbinic prohibition. Whereas here, in these cases, these are potential Torah prohibitions. And even in those cases, some people hold that it could be permissible. So what's going to happen when I have an unintended outcome that is necessary but the prohibition is only ever at most rabbinic. Now we get to the key card question. And we're going to add in, what we'll do next week is add in another possible way of thinking about unintended and necessary that becomes different when you don't actually touch the items. Let me give you a thought of sort of a cliffhanger to consider. Does anybody have plants on your windowsill? Anybody have plants on your windowsill? We have a lot of plants on our windowsill in our home. Do you have, and if you have shades on your windowsill, so when you raise and lower shades in front of a plant that's on a windowsill, you're letting in sun and potentially aiding in the growth of your plants. So imagine for a moment it's Shabbos lunch. My plants are on my windowsill and my shades are down. And I want to lift the shades so that I could see my food better because it's a little dark in my dining room. But by virtue of lifting the shades, I'm going to let more light in, or maybe the windows are open and I'll let rain in. And it's going to cause my plants to grow better because they have sun. Or imagine for a moment I'm a new Dati kibbutz that's just being built in the early days of Medinat Israel in the early 1900s. And I have a greenhouse. And all of a sudden, it's piercingly hot on a Saturday. And if I don't cover my greenhouse, all of my plants are going to die. I'm not going to have tomatoes. Can I cover to protect my plants? Or flip? I want to uncover the greenhouse so that the sun gets and grows my tomatoes better on Shabbos. So now we're not just talking about like one plant on my windowsill. We're talking about the parnasa of my kibbutz, my oranges, whatever I'm growing in my kibbutz, in my hothouse. In the early 1900s, when for the first time, they're like frum Jews who were farming and had hothouses, this was a huge pressing debate. How do I deal with hothouses? How do I deal with greenhouses? And there's a sort of a fairly straightforward line from a greenhouse to the shades on your plants, in front of your plants on your windowsill. Those are all cases of eino mitkavein b'psik reisha, unintentioned, but definitely will happen, but nichale. It's good. I want my plants to grow better. That question is going to then become, in my mind, I believe, the source that will eventually permit using our key cards on Shabbat in the hotel rooms. Okay, any other questions? It's already a little bit after 12. If you need to go, you're welcome to go. But questions, thoughts, ideas?
I was wondering, I was just talking to Gloria. It's, I never thought about this, on Sukkot when I used to have my sukkah on the ground, so that I never thought about the issue of, if I'm sitting on in the chair, that'll inevitably make a furrow.
Big problem.
Yeah.
Also, if you have a schlock on top of your schach and you undo the schlock and it makes the ground wet.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I never thought about that. Now we're on a deck now, so I don't have
Right,
that
so
issue.
a sukkah that's on Earth, where you're going to sit with a chair, like a folding chair on
Right.
Earth, would be a serious problem.
Yeah, that's what I just thought about that. You know, retroactively. So, but as I said, it's no longer an issue. As I say, we have our sukkah on a deck. So the
Another version of
children on
that
the
same
deck.
question is: let's say let's just say you want to take a picnic on Shabbos. You want to have a picnic on Shabbos day. You want to go to Wave Hill, and you go to Wave Hill or you go to Seton Park. You want to wash your hands, but there's grass under your feet. Can you wash your hands? You're not intentionally watering the grass.
Would you have to get up and go to the concrete area?
Okay. The answer to your question is yes. You have to go find some concrete. You can't water over grass. The Sukkot creates all sorts of problems because people are all of a sudden eating outside. The Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, says you're not supposed to have Kiddush outside, meaning on grass, because he's so afraid that people are going to spill stuff and make a mess, and therefore they're going to water the grass. You could see how this could lead to sort of a certain type of neuroses, but
Yes.
but it's important to at least understand like what's happening in the background here, because if you unintentional things are permissible, but unintended necessary outcomes are prohibited if they're desired. So how do we deal with questions now like the key card on the hotel door, sensor lights, thermostats, all that stuff where I'm just walking through the world in sort of a normal way and things are responding to me, or I want to put my key card into the hotel so that I can go to bed.
Just go with what the example you gave with the hothouse question is the fact that earning a living for the kibbutz, or possibly even destroying a living for the kibbutz, is that a factor as well? In other words,
I think it was one of those questions where the answer was obvious before it was asked.
I see. Okay.
But how they get there is interesting. How they get there, I think, is a helpful tool for us.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Have a wonderful day,
In
everybody.
a couple of weeks.
Looking forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. See everybody next week with Rabbi Katz.
Okay.
End the meeting, Bert?
Yes, you can do that.
All right, everybody.